Hi folks, Astronomy Live here. Back in March of this year, I generated a prediction of the April 8th, 2024 eclipse using the spreadsheet that you see here. It uses math to calculate where the moon's shadow will land on the Earth's surface over time, and we're going to get into more details about how I did that. But using these coordinates over time, I plotted the path of totality on Google Earth. In fact, I did this back in 2017 as well, as you can see here. And then I did it in March of this year to predict the April 8th solar eclipse, and I was able to observe totality from the position predicted by my own calculations. Reds Rhetoric and AT2 Productions came with me to this cabin on Lake Parlin in Maine, and we were able to observe totality exactly as my spreadsheet said we would. The ability to predict the path of totality and tell you where you need to stand to actually see totality is a feature unique to the globe model. Flat Earthers are unable to make these kinds of predictions, but one of them claims to be able to do just that using the flat Earth. Let's take a look at Shane. This is Shane St. Pierre. He's a flat earther who presents himself as a guru on celestial calculations. As I covered in my previous video predicting the April 8th, 2024 eclipse, Shane is infamous for stealing Walter Bislin's flat Earth dome model. Walter's model uses the globe to predict the positions of stars, the sun, and the moon, but bends the light in arbitrary observer position dependent directions to fit it to a flat Earth dome. Now, as Walter showed in his model, even this force-fit solution fails to explain or predict several basic things we see in reality. One of those critical limitations is the inability to predict the path of totality of a solar eclipse. So, despite Shane stealing Walter's model and falsely claiming it as his own work, Shane still had a problem. Specifically, his problem was an eclipse that would be viewed across North America in 2024 and would serve to highlight the limitations of Walter's model and the inability of flat Earth to predict the path of totality during a solar eclipse. What to do? Shane's solution to this problem is to try to co-opt a globe Earth method of predicting the path of totality and falsely claiming it to be a flat Earth method of predicting totality. Furthermore, he claims that no one really predicts eclipses, that it's all just repeating cycles, and anyone who understands this can seem to predict the next eclipse. Keep that in mind as we go through this video, because that's a claim that's going to come back to haunt Shane.
People are being dumb, so I decided to pretend to predict everything, right? They were like, no, only heliocentrism can predict things. And I was like, nobody predicts anything. It's a post-diction. And they went, I'm retarded and don't know anything. And I went, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put a wizard hat on. I'm going to pretend to do magic to predict eclipses. And until one of you does the same thing, I'm going to lord all over you. So that's what we're doing. That's where we're at. Of course, be an adult and own the kinematic and dynamic equivalence between heliocentric and geocentric positions like an adult, or, you get clowned on.
Shane is perfectly aware that I've been predicting eclipses. In fact, he commented on my video predicting the April 8th eclipse. But this contradicts his own claim that these two authors are the only ones who have been predicting eclipses for the globe. He's going to be making claims about how eclipses are predicted when using Besselian elements, and you can find out more information on how this is really done in the book on the left, and we'll get into that shortly. But I also want you to notice that he sometimes switches the argument from flat Earth to a geocentrism argument. That's a completely separate argument and does not necessitate a flat Earth. In fact, the method I use for predicting eclipses features a selenocentric reference frame at times. In other words, the moon at the center of the reference frame. I use this to compute where the moon's shadow is being projected and where the Earth is as seen from the moon, and from that I find where the moon's shadow is landing on the Earth. Does that mean I literally believe that the entire universe revolves around the moon? No, of course not, but I use that reference frame for the simplicity of the calculations. Switching to a geocentric reference frame in other methods or at other times in the calculation does not mean that the universe is literally revolving around the Earth any more than my method means that the universe is literally revolving around the moon. Shane is desperately quote mining for anything he thinks he can use to undermine mainstream science, and if that means focusing on geocentrism for a moment, that's what he'll do. This is why he stole Walter Bislin's model. and tried to claim that this is literally what's happening in reality and is representative of the true shape of the Earth. He even taunted Walter by saying, "Thanks, Walter," after stealing his model, and he's now trying to do the same thing, trying to steal Bazelian elements from Fred Espenak, saying, "Thanks, Fred." When Shane steals something, he has all the subtlety of a cartoon Batman villain, and I wouldn't be surprised if he tries to steal my spreadsheet as well after this video is published.
So, moving right along, we figured out how to do this from a geocentric perspective, just to spite people on Twitter, but ended up putting more effort into anything than we've ever done before.
Considering how little work he actually did when we dig into it, I wouldn't have admitted that if I were him. Okay, let's continue.
That you can do some complicated math with to predict essentially where the shadow will be on a map using GPS and any celestial coordinate projection map, right? Again, this is what we put on Twitter, and they said I plagiarized the definition from NASA. Of course, right below there is what I cited, where I got the definition from NASA. That doesn't help anyone knowing the definition. You can't plagiarize that. I used that to calculate the Besselian elements for the specific eclipse, of course, but
what he actually seems to mean when he says that he calculated the Besselian elements is just that he calculated the instantaneous position of the shadow on the fundamental plane using the Besselian elements that he got from another source. But we'll get into all of that in just a minute.
Chosen plane, the fundamental plane, that would be what? All right, of course. This is geocentric normal plane of the shadow axis. In other words, it is a plane through the Earth's center that is perpendicular to the line through the centers of the occulting and occulted bodies.
He fundamentally does not understand what he just said. He thinks the fundamental plane is the Earth itself, that it's treating the Earth as a flat plane. Instead, and what his figure shows, is a plane that bisects the spheroid of the Earth.
Up being like a matrix, you get a X, Y, D, L1, L2, and I think U, right? And between those elements, you can just predict and project that shadow anywhere from any coordinate system on any map.
The problem for him is that he doesn't actually seem to know how to go from the Besselian elements to a prediction of where the shadow will actually be on the Earth in terms of latitude and longitude coordinates. He only knows how to use the polynomial expressions to simply plug in a time and get an instantaneous result for the x and y coordinates of the shadow on the fundamental plane that bisects the spheroid of the Earth, but he doesn't know how to translate that to a position on the surface of the Earth. And yes, that translation does treat Earth as an oblate spheroid.
So it's a place on the celestial sphere are analogous to the geographic coordinate system used on the surface of Earth. They differ in the fundamental plane, but of still geocentric, observer focused. Has to be. Can't be any other way.
That's categorically wrong, and as I previously discussed, my own prediction of the 2017 and 2024 eclipses used a selenocentric perspective. And yes, that means that the celestial sphere I was using in those calculations at that time had a selenocentric reference frame, meaning the moon was at the center, not the Earth.
Here's just the personal celestial sphere with the Besselian elements overlay. Here's the final result. My actual prediction up top from the spreadsheet that I showed them, the absolute data that was computed, the Excel sheet that we used to get it, and the resultant beautiful shadow that we were able to project using math.
As I discussed in my prediction of the April eclipse, it doesn't matter what kind of map you project the final result on. That doesn't make it a flat Earth prediction. It is using the globe. Now I want to focus a moment on the spreadsheet he shows at the bottom right corner. He claims that that spreadsheet was used to make the predictions up top. I don't believe this for a minute. He hasn't shown any of the equations used to go from the instantaneous x and y position of the shadow on the fundamental plane to translate that to a position on the Earth's surface. As best I can tell, the only thing he has done in the top right corner is take the 5 millennium canon of solar eclipses and simply republish it, calling it Shane's Special Flurf Magic, and rearrange the column order a bit. I cannot find any place on his website or Twitter or anywhere else where he offers a link to allow you to download that spreadsheet and see how it actually functions. And there are certain things in that spreadsheet that are not derivable just from the Besselian elements. For example, Cannon plate number. This is the chart number that you will find that particular eclipse on, because in the 5 Millennium Catalog of Solar Eclipses, there are multiple eclipse charts shown on each page. So you need to know the Cannon plate number to know which page to turn to find that eclipse's map. As further evidence of this, I'm going to show you this clip from his YouTube channel, where again he claims to be showing how to calculate the position of the eclipse based on the Besselian elements.
This polynomial expression and these Besselian elements describe this shadow path according to this gridded network of the reticule. Super easy to understand, super easy to predict, actually, once you understand it, and once you have, in my case, the spreadsheet to do it for you. Functions, I just have the x and the y graphed out, and I just put in the polynomial expression that we have, right? And then you just run that down. You run this formula for x, you put it in here, and then you just pop it down. And it runs down all of this, and you give it, the coefficient for time. After this, this is what it would be. And that's how you get the plot. And of course, once you have it.
This screenshot demonstrates that Shane really doesn't understand what he's doing here, because time is actually expressed in hours, and although it starts at hour 0, even by hour 3, the x and y coordinates indicate that the umbral shadow of the moon has left the Earth. The total eclipse is over, because the x and y coordinates are actually expressed in the radius of the Earth. And so he's continuing to extend that information all the way down to hour number 23. The eclipse has long been over, and these Besselian elements are only valid over a short period of time, which is why each eclipse has a unique set of Besselian elements. Now, he may understand that much of it because it's expressed in the website that he stole and put on his own website, poorly. This page on Shane's website is lifted almost in its entirety from Greg Miller's website. Again, poorly. You can see he hasn't handled for the special characters at all, and he's basically destroyed the formatting to the point that it's illegible. He does link to the page in the beginning, but he's basically just doing a lazy copy-paste of it and not even handling it correctly. This is what it looks like on Greg Miller's actual website. Because Shane's idea of research is to just plagiarize sources he finds online, he's unable to go from the interpolated position on the fundamental plane to the actual position of the shadow on the Earth's surface. And he probably would have taken that information from this website as well if that section of the website was completed. But unfortunately for Shane, that section of the website is currently incomplete. We also know that Shane tried to get a large language model to do his homework for him. You see, Shane has here his idea of flat GPT, instructing a large language model to role-play as a flat earther for him to try to give him the calculations he needs. The AI tries to describe and do some basic calculations on the polynomials to compute the instantaneous position on the fundamental plane, but it doesn't give him the equations he needs to take that to a position on the surface of the Earth. Let this also be a lesson to everyone watching that you should never rely on a large language model as a substitute for actual research, because it gets some basic things wrong. For example, it says that the Besselian element d is the declination of the moon relative to the sun. That's flat out wrong. It's not relative to the sun. It's relative to the celestial equator. It's just the declination of the moon. So what does Shane believe needs to be done to go from the x and y coordinates of the moon's shadow on the fundamental plane in order to get the coordinates of the moon's shadow on the surface of the Earth? He actually believes that predicting eclipses using Besselian elements is modeling the Earth as a flat plane, and that all you have to do is rotate it, because he believes the spheroid is the celestial sphere rather than the Earth itself.
And here's a nice, essentially a plot, right? If we put yourself in a celestial sphere, to get these, you just rotate it around. You literally shove a fundamental plane through that bitch and rotate it around any axis, the shadows will form. Actually kind of amazing. Kind of proud of myself.
Well, that's completely wrong. So we're now going to take a look at the book here on the left, which describes how to actually go from the Besselian elements to a prediction of where the moon's shadow is on the surface of the Earth. Page 8 shows a diagram of the fundamental plane bisecting the Earth. That's right, it's modeling the Earth as an oblate spheroid, and the fundamental plane is simply bisecting that spheroid. The X and Y coordinates alone don't tell you the position of the moon's shadow on the Earth's surface. You actually have to model it as an oblate spheroid. In my simplified computations, I modeled the Earth as just a perfect sphere, which was good enough for approximate results, but this book goes into detail and does account for the oblateness of the Earth. Section 12 of this book shows how to calculate rho sine of phi prime, which is the geocentric latitude, as well as rho cosine of the geocentric latitude of the observer. The geocentric latitude is slightly different from normal geographical or astronomical latitude due to the oblateness of the Earth, which is why you see the factor 0.996644719 used here. These results will be used in later sections to calculate the local circumstances of an eclipse, and as you can see, this also accounts for the observer's height above the surface and divides by the radius of the Earth, so that the final position is described in terms of the Earth's radius. On this page, you can see how rho sine phi prime and rho cosine phi prime are being used to compute the observer's location relative to the fundamental plane. As I mentioned before, it's not enough to simply calculate the x and y coordinates of the shadow on that fundamental plane. Instead, you need to find where the shadow actually intersects the Earth's surface and where it is relative to an observer on that surface. And as we just saw, that position is on the surface of an oblate spheroid with an equatorial radius of about 6,378,140 meters. I've gone ahead and added all the necessary calculations to my eclipse prediction spreadsheet in this new section. My spreadsheet will now compute the shadow location twice, once using my original approximate method where I treated the globe as perfectly spherical in places, but directly computed the shadow location using the orbits of the Earth and Moon. And now it will also do so a second time using Besselian elements, independent from the previous results. This latter method requires you to input the Besselian elements for the eclipse that you want to predict down in this section, including T0 as a fractional Julian day number. And so for that reason, you will be limited in using this method by the length of the Besselian element catalog that you have access to. Shane bragged about using a pivot table for the whole list of Besselian elements and eclipse predictions from the 5 Millennium catalog, and if he wants to add that to the spreadsheet for his convenience, he's welcome to do so. And that's the clincher. Even if Shane now steals the spreadsheet or its equations, he's still limited to just the catalog of Besselian elements that he was already borrowing. That is, unless he wants to adopt my method of computing the eclipse shadow position directly using the orbits of the Earth and Moon, which is something that he was previously pretending that no one does. The 5 Millennium catalog of solar eclipses that Shane had been using ends in the year 3000. The eclipse of October 19th, 3000 is the last eclipse listed in this particular catalog. I can take the Besselian elements from the 5 Millennium catalog's final eclipse, plug it into my spreadsheet, and get a result that is very close to my own approximation from my original method of predicting eclipses directly, using the orbits of the Earth and Moon. I took the coordinates of the shadow path predicted by my method of predicting eclipses over multiple points in time during this eclipse and plotted them on Google Earth, and I get a chart that is very similar to the official chart shown in the 5 Millennium catalog for this eclipse. But just to emphasize it again one more time, the coordinates shown here on Google Earth were generated using my method for predicting eclipses, not the method using Besselian elements that I just added to the spreadsheet. These results from the Besselian elements are simply provided for reference and comparison, and are within a couple of degrees of my own approximate method. This is the last eclipse for which I can use Besselian elements from the 5 Millennium catalog of eclipses, because that's where the catalog ends. But I already know that the next total solar eclipse would occur on October 9th, 3001, because I found that eclipse using my own spreadsheet and my own method. This is why I challenged Shane to show me how Flat Earth predicts the path of totality for the total eclipse on October 9th, 3001. If this is just a post-diction, if this is all just repeating cycles, then it should be easy, even trivial, for Shane to predict the next eclipse in the sequence. After all, he's got a 5 Millennium canon of eclipses to go off of, so it should be easy for him to predict the next eclipse path that isn't in that catalog, shouldn't it? He did two things in quick succession in response. One was to immediately block me on Twitter. The other was to hide my reply on his post, and to this date, this is the only reply he hid from that post. That's how threatened he was by it. As I mentioned before, each solar eclipse has its own unique set of Besselian elements, and you have to use that particular set for that particular eclipse. It's only valid over a very short period of time. So if you even take it out to the next eclipse in the sequence, such as the eclipse occurring on October 9th, 3001, the method breaks down. It doesn't give a result. But my method of directly computing the shadow position based on the orbits of the Earth and Moon, that continues to work just fine. Even if Shane finally learns how to convert from Besselian elements to latitude and longitude of the shadow position on the surface of the Earth, he'll still need Besselian elements for each eclipse that he wants to predict. Meanwhile, I'm computing the eclipse directly from the orbits of the Earth and Moon, and I'm not limited to, say, the 5 Millennium Catalog, or Besselian elements for specific longer eclipses occurring thereafter. Finally, here's my chart for the eclipse that will occur on October 9th, 3001. Shane is completely unable to generate this kind of prediction without help from existing Besselian elements, despite his claims that this is just a post-diction based on cycles. The Shengwin very well might come along and steal my Excel spreadsheet now so that he can generate predictions of this and future eclipses and project it out on AE maps or whatever flat Earth map he wants to pick that day. But that won't change the fact that it's a globe Earth prediction, and it certainly won't allow him to rise to my challenge before the publication of this video. He thought he could get away with lying about how these eclipse predictions work, but in the end, the Shengwin cannot escape his fate.
I got you! I got you! Take that, you friggin' psycho! I got you!